welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I am your host, Jessica, and I'm really excited. We were actually just talking before we started recording about how now every time Alexis Henderson comes out with a book, we are on her checklist of people to check in with, right?
I feel like I can't do it without you at this point. Like, it's tradition. I feel like it's the third time, right? So that's tradition.
I think, yeah, what is it? It feels very magical, I guess, in a way. This is the third time's a charm, and now we are three times. So welcome, Alexis Henderson. Thank you so much for coming back. Let's talk about Academy for Liars, which was a really, really beautiful dark academia book. Do you want to chat a little bit about it and maybe where it came from?
Yeah. So An Academy for Liars is a story about like a troubled woman who ends up enrolling in a college of dark psychological magic that's hidden in this like secret pocket of Savannah, Georgia, which is a city where I grew up. And I have been kind of workshopping and brainstorming the story for years now. It was totally different when the idea first came to me. It was actually kind of set in a second world, and a lot of the characters were still in the story, but they were different versions of themselves. I just couldn't crack the story. And eventually I ended up landing on Savannah, Georgia. I'd always wanted to write a Savannah book, and I realized that like once I set the book in Savannah, the whole thing just kind of exploded for me. And it became, the book that I have today. And I don't even know where the story came from. I feel like there were so many different influences. I knew that I wanted to write about magicians. I kind of tend to write my way through different like magical creatures. And I would make an argument that I think magicians are kind of like a magical creature in of themselves. I think people change so much when they have access to like mass amounts of power that they become almost monstrous. And that's something that I really wanted to explore within the pages of this book. I oftentimes call my characters pseudo magicians because it's kind of like my own spin. But yeah, I had so much fun with the story, and I loved writing a disaster main character, Lennon. She's definitely one of the more thorny main characters, one of the more flawed, but she was a lot of fun. So
I really liked her, and I thought that one of the things that really grabbed me about Academy for Liars and Lennon Carter's story is that it's a school, as one might imagine, a magical school, as you mentioned, kind of in the pocket of reality in Savannah, Georgia, if one may call it that. And it seems to find people at their lowest point, which was really interesting to me because for the most part, when you read these books that are dark academia, it's like it starts off with the excitement of being found, and almost like that hero's journey where it's like the call to adventure. And here, I mean, for Lennon, and I don't want to talk too much about what happens to her, but she's not at a good point in her life, and something happens to the only stable thing in her life, or the only seemingly stable thing in her life, and she ends up being invited to this school, Drayton. And it's almost like she has no choice. It's like, here's your call to adventure, but also your life is crap, and what else are you going to do with it? And the more you meet the other characters, and I don't want to give away too much, it seems like this is when Drayton finds you. Drayton doesn't find you when you're 18, or necessarily like when you're just ready to explore the open world. Drayton finds you when you are one foot in the gutter, and that was really interesting to me.
Yeah, thank you so much. I feel like when people hit adulthood, like especially like kids that maybe were told like gifted and talented, that kind of type A personality type, sometimes there's this burnout that you hit when you're an adult and you feel like you didn't reach your potential. And I feel like, at least for me, like I remember being in like early 20s and feeling like, oh, that's it. I didn't meet that goal. And it's so young, but at the same time, I think it's such a real feeling. So I wanted, to kind of experiment with kids who maybe felt like their dreams hadn't been realized. They're not kids, they're adults, but they were once kids, who had big dreams and maybe those dreams weren't realized. And then them kind of falling into this magical, almost hero's journey story at that point. That resonated with me too. And I think, I love the kind of trope of like a super talented, super smart main character who kind of is chosen because of those attributes and enters a magic school. Absolutely love it. But for this story, I kind of wanted to see what would happen if I gave that same role to a character that maybe didn't think that she was the smartest person in the room, or wasn't confident, or didn't have the grades to show her intelligence. Yeah, so that was kind of how I approached things with Lennon. I had a very unconventional background when it comes to education myself. I was actually homeschooled from first grade all the way through to my senior year. So like the first time that I can really remember sitting in like a conventional classroom was in college. And because of that, I felt like I kind of didn't fit in with a lot of my peers. And I wouldn't say I struggled academically. I was okay, but the structure of sitting in a classroom and going home and doing homework was not really something I was super familiar with. And I didn't feel comfortable in that environment when I first entered it. So I drew a lot from that when I was writing Lennon about a character who maybe doesn't feel particularly at home in this school setting.
Yeah, I got that from her. And I think, even if you are conventionally educated, sometimes people just have that, weird feeling like they're a little offset. And
Yeah.
everybody in this school was offset. The other thing I found really interesting was that the power that they were supposed to be tapping into was the power of persuasion, and to read emotions, which is very different from other magic school books that I have read. And the entrance exam was also very interesting in that way. How did that begin to fit into it?
I think I really wanted a magic system that felt like it could be real, at least at first, before it gets kind of too surreal and fantastical. I wanted something where you could almost imagine that's a power that we have or that could exist in our world. And I knew that the book was going to center a lot around Lennon's struggles with her own mind. Her own mind is not like a safe place. She really struggles with her mental health, and that's a huge that's something that she has to really overcome through the book. So it made sense that the magic system sort of paralleled that. It's a magic system that's about the mind and about psychology. Lennon struggles with mental illness. The two just kind of seamlessly came together, and it created the kind of story that I wanted to write about. And then I had to ask myself, okay, well, how am I going to like convey this story on paper? And I love a good entry exam, like in The Magicians. That's one of my absolute like favorite parts of that whole book. So I also like, I'm a hugely anxious test taker. I mean, my version of hell is probably like just having to take the ACT or SAT like multiple times again and again and again. I hate it. And so I was like, I want to kind of do my own spin on this like standardized sort of test for a psychological magic school. So that's kind of how I approached it. And yeah, I wanted it to kind of feel like almost nonsensical, but you kind of see a through line, like, okay, maybe they're quizzing for this or that specifically. And yeah, that was it. I think that was actually one of, as far as like most fun I had while writing, that was one of the most fun scenes to write, was just the test taking scene. And one day I really want to like create the whole test like in real life, because I think it would be fun to take. I think I would fail it, but
Yeah, I was gonna ask if that was a nod to the Magicians. It was almost, it was like, it was so funny because it's almost like, when you're looking at a mirror and you're seeing something familiar, and then like the mirror is almost like cut in half, and the other side it's similar but slightly distorted. And that was kind of how it was. I was like, okay, I was like, there's something very familiar about it, but this is like a completely different take on it, and I loved it.
Thank you. I absolutely love The Magicians. I think that like I definitely want to do my own spin and kind of mix it with my own college experience and all the tests I've taken. I think that like I really would love to see more magical sit down tests in books. Another really good like test scene, or it's not even a full scene because you don't get to see the full test. You see some of like the lead up, I think. But in the Poppy Wars, there's also like a test that Rin has to take to get into her like kind of like, it's kind of like a magical university, I guess. But I love a good test scene in a book. And so it's definitely something I knew going in. I was like, I want to do my own magical test. So yeah, I love that.
So the Drayton is, man, it is a really interesting place. And the people, as I mentioned before, who are the students there, it's not, again, it's not like you're there with your peers. The ages are different, the backgrounds are very, very different, and everybody's, really there because it's like, well, you're either going to do this thing or you have to accept not great things that happened in your life. I really liked Lennon's classmates too. I thought that they were really interesting. And when just the whole story with them kind of came together, it added to it. Was there ever a point where somebody kind of came in when you didn't expect them to, or were there any characters? I know you mentioned that the story was very different that sort of changed.
Yeah, Claude's character grew a lot. I think he became a kind of a darker and slightly more tortured character than the character I was first introduced to. I think in a weird way, I was kind of almost introduced to a younger version of himself, and I realized, as he kind of grew through the writing process, the character that would exist within the story that I actually published. So yeah, Claude really he changed a lot. He was a lot more naive and innocent in my earlier drafts. And I think that's just true to who he is, but he's kind of taken on a lot of like trauma through his time at Drayton and just in general. And Blaine, I think, was always herself. She kind of walked onto the page very confident, very distinct. But I think that I got to know her better as I was writing, and I was kind of surprised by what I found. I kind of in my head thought that of all the characters in the story, that in some ways she was the most put together, and I think she appears that way, like the most put together, perhaps the most like mentally well among like a book, a lot of characters that just aren't very mentally well. So but then I was like, oh no, you've got your own stuff too, and I was really surprised when I kind of, in some ways, I felt like I was being reintroduced to her. There's just some characters that are really hard to get past that kind of initial facade. I think characters tend to kind of hide things, especially in the first 2 to 3 drafts, and that was definitely the case with Blaine. I felt like I really had to almost earn the right to know more about her, and to see those vulnerabilities and the things that she's struggled with. So yeah, the passages where I explored that more were also like kind of sad and hard, because I'm very fond of her. But I think those were the two that really shocked and surprised me. Dante and Lennon, I think I had a handle on them pretty early on. So fewer surprises there in some ways, although I will say that like Lennon as a rule was just very unpredictable. But I just came to expect that as I was writing. Like from the beginning, I just knew that I wasn't going to be able to predict the decisions she made and that a lot of them would be bad. So I was kind of prepared for that.
So Dante, he was a really interesting character too.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I mean, he almost had like main character energy in a way. Did you have trouble with him kind of trying to steal the scene in certain points?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. He's like he I think that this story almost could have been his. I think that there's another book here where I could have written it from his perspective, and I think it would have been very different, but I think he could have held it on his shoulders if need be. He is a kind of a scene stealer for sure. And there's definitely times, like there are scenes that I did like kind of walk through from his perspective. As a matter of fact, on my laptop I have like the entire outline of this entire book from his perspective only. So like every scene where you see Lennon, like I know what Dante's doing at that time, even if he's not on the page. And that was important for me because his plot line does kind of align so much with Lennon's, but there's a lot that she doesn't know, but I need to know it. So yeah, he was really fun, and kind of sorting through his past and his traumas, and trying to figure out how those would manifest on the page, what he would show, what he wouldn't. I think he's another character who kind of holds things close to the chest. So it took a lot of drafts to really kind of refine that and figure out how to kind of convey certain things without being too on the nose, because that's not his way. Yeah, he was tough. I think it's really hard. This is a struggle with this book, and I think a lot of my books is that I think that the characters I write about are oftentimes like most of the time way smarter than I am, and it's hard to write about people who I feel like are so beyond me. It takes me like 5 drafts to catch up to something that I think that Dante would have figured out in like 5 minutes, So I think there's like a lot of like insecurity on my part, and revising and rewriting to make sure that I can kind of not stay 2 steps ahead, but just kind of catch up to what I feel like my characters would be doing or trying to do. So that was tough. It's tough, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I would be curious actually. I mean, this wasn't something I was planning on asking, but would you ever write the book from his perspective?
I could pull Stephanie Meyer. I would love that. I think I would have fun with that. I definitely
Oh,
love
you
the
went
idea. I
there.
love Midnight Sun. I love it. I was okay. I have to like I was one of those people, I think like years ago when Stephanie Meyer, this is like a tangent, when Stephanie Meyer like published part of Midnight Sun online because it had leaked, I was one of those people who like read it immediately. Like I really loved it. So I think that that's always really cool. And I would jump at that opportunity. I'm not sure that it would ever happen, but maybe it would just be a for me thing. Because I do miss the characters a lot. So yeah.
Would you ever write in this world again then? I know I asked you that about the Bethel books. And I know that things changed with that, but with this one, would you ever revisit it?
I'm definitely open to it for sure. I don't have any plans to do that at this point, but I just think it's like when you create a sandbox and you work so hard to create a world, it's almost like it feels like a bit of a waste to just shut the door on it entirely. But I think I have to really find the right story and the right moment to enter into this world again. And I haven't found that yet. So no plans, but I never say never.
I wanted to also just talk about, and again, I really don't want to give anything away, but the visuals of this book. It was, there were some scenes. It was definitely scary. And just for listeners, one of the reasons why I wanted to release this around Halloween time, because it is a really, really scary book. It's got some real juicy horror in it, and some moments where I went, oh my God, how did those scenes kind of play out in your head? Like, was it one of those things where you were writing and you just knew what was coming and you're just like, well, here we go?
I think, you know, a lot of the horror moments from this book particularly, I pull out of things that I've just thought about or been scared of. So like the scene where Lennon sees her own reflection in the mirror for the first time. She's kind of standing between two mirrors or facing each other, and it's creating this kind of infinity where you can see all of the reflections behind and front. So the idea of this kind of like one rogue reflection stepping out of line and like her reflection not obeying her, that's kind of like a nightmarish scenario that I actually came up with as a child. I was at a Macy's. I remember where I was. I was standing at a Macy's in a mall that probably doesn't exist anymore. And I was on one of those little pedestals that you stand on when you're like, you know, wearing a nice dress. And it was a really dusty fitting room. And I looked at all of these infinite me's in the mirror because the mirrors were facing each other. And I was like, what if one of them just wasn't like the others? Like, what if it came toward me or did its own thing or did a dance? And I had always thought about that image. And then with this book, I literally took that thought that I'd had in childhood and kind of put it in the book. So I think some of the horror just is from my own kind of nightmares, and it's just what my brain goes toward. I really was setting out with this story to not necessarily write a straight up horror novel, but I think that in some ways it's scarier than some of my other stuff. And that's the fun thing I think about horror specifically, is that it can be so many things and people are scared of so many different things that you really never know how scary a book is going to be or how it's going to land, just because people's fear triggers are so different. So I've definitely like seen some whispers that this is one of my darker stories, which really did surprise me, because I didn't think that it would be one of, you know, the darker ones in comparison to like House of Hunger, which, you know, it's got a lot of blood and vampiric elements. But now with some reflection, I can totally see it. I think the book is a little bit of a nightmare, and I had a lot of fun pulling from my own nightmares and my own memories to write, yeah, some of the horror scenes.
I loved it. I loved it so much.
Thank you.
It is, and I think I've described your books like this before. It's like really, really good dark chocolate. It is,
Oh, thank you.
it's smooth and it's sweet and bitter at the same time. And I can't say enough about it. It's so good. I
Thank
guess
you.
the one last thing I wanted to ask you about was the character names, because they are really good. How did you start with the names? Like, was it difficult to come up with, or did you just know that this is what this character was called?
Yeah, the names actually changed quite a bit. I think Dante's might have stayed the same, and I have some theories as to why I named him Dante. I think the biggest is that I'm a big fan of Inferno by Dante Alighieri, so I think that it might have been like this is a character who's quite literally been through hell, and maybe that's why my mind made that connection. It was not logical, but I was kind of wondered if that was where that came from. Lennon was just difficult to name. I think there's a version where for the longest time her name was Jonah, which I liked, but I felt like it didn't quite fit. And then I can't even tell you how I landed on Lennon. It just when I heard that name, it just felt kind of right. And I was like, that's her, you know, I felt it. So sometimes I'm just like really waiting for things to click. Blaine is another one though. Like I said, she just kind of walked onto the page as who she was, and she was always Blaine from the beginning. So yeah, I think I go through a lot of a big file of like, I call them my baby names because my characters are kind of like my babies. And it's got like hundreds of names on there, and I kind of like go through and I oftentimes change them, but I kind of wait for the right feeling, and I usually know when it really clicks into place. And sometimes it's immediately when I see the name, and other times I just write a specific scene and I'm like, oh, there it is. This has been the right name all along, and I'm sure of it. So yeah.
I think that this is going to be a huge hit. Like I said, I'd love to read in this world again. Are you working on something past this, or are you taking a break for a bit?
Yeah, I have two books that I'm actually working on, three books that I'm actually working on right now. And none of them have been announced yet, so I can't say too much, but yeah, those are like the ones that I'm sort of splitting my focus between, as you know, also I'm dealing with an Academy for Liars coming out and trying to do the promotional thing and, be present to talk about that book as well. But it's definitely a situation where I feel like I have like, a lot of pots around the stove right now, but I feel so immensely like lucky that I get to say that. I think the last couple of times we've talked, I was a lot earlier in my career and I was more unsure of like, whether I'd be able to do this long term and like, what my next books would be and if I would get the opportunity again to tell these stories. And now I feel like a lot of the books that I had been kind of like carrying in my heart, like the last few times I talked to you, I get to actually like bring them to the page and to the shelves now. And that feels absolutely surreal. Absolutely surreal. And yeah, like talking to you is just always such a great way to kind of like check in and look back and see how things have changed since the last time we spoke. And I just love that.
So before we go, I am curious, what are you reading? What are you consuming? TV shows, books, movies? What
Oh my
is
gosh. I'm gonna
catching
watch
your fancy?
I'm gonna watch The Thing soon. So that's like I have a Halloween list of all of the movies that I want to watch, and then I'm just trying to hit a couple of classics that I haven't seen yet. So I haven't seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I have started The Exorcist and stopped it several times because I freaking panicked and I couldn't finish it. But this year will be the year where I am brave enough to watch The Exorcist. And I also have sitting on my shelf here. I've read this already, but I want to reread it for the holiday season. It's really short. The holiday season, the holiday in question being Halloween. And it's Bad Dolls by Rachel Harrison. And it's an anthology of short stories. You can read it in a day, but it is so good. I absolutely love this. I love Rachel Harrison as an author. She writes horror novels, and this one is filled with all these like delightful little like frightening, sometimes gory tales, and I can't recommend it enough for Halloween. So yeah.
Your holiday and my holiday are the same.
Right? I'm like, that's the holiday season for me. I love Halloween.
I always with my kids, it's always very funny because we decorate fairly early for Halloween, not as early as some people now, but we were talking about it the other day. I was walking around my neighborhood and my son was asking, it's only September, how come they decorate for Halloween already? And I was like, how some people are with Christmas? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, that's how some people are with Halloween. And he's like, okay, I understand. I get it. That's sounds about right. So yeah, all for Halloween. Very excited. Check out Academy for Liars. It is delicious. It is wonderful. And I'm really excited for the next time we talk.
Me too. I can't wait. I'm already looking forward to it.
Yes, I am like, as soon as I see your name come across my feed again, I'm going to be like, well, here we go. Time to check in with Alexis.
I can't wait. I'm so excited. I'm already counting down the days. Can't wait.
All right. So this is Jessica. Our guest today has been
Alexis. Thank you so much, Jessica, for having me.
You're welcome. And we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.